This video is going to be talking about the distributive property and how we can use it with the rectangle method. Let's start with talking about the distributive property. When I see the word property, I should think rule. We've heard the word property used before when we've talked about commutative properties in class. Just like the commutative property, the distributive property is also a rule about multiplication. And it's specifically talking about when we see problems that look like this. Normally when I see a problem that looks like this, I should do what's in the parentheses first. Using our rules of PEMDAS, I know that 4 plus 2 is 6. However, when we're using the distributive property, I want to distribute the 8 to the 4 and to the 2. But what exactly am I doing? When there's nothing here in this blank spot, I know that I should multiply. So I'm going to write 8 times 4 because I distributed it to the 4, and I'm going to write 8 times 2 because I've distributed it out to the 2. Now I'm missing my plus sign, so I'm going to add those two together. In this process, I'm going to solve both multiplication problems. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 times 2 is 16. Then I would add them together. 32 plus 16. 8 and 4. Let's do a few more examples. If I have the problem 4 parentheses 6 plus 8, I can distribute this 4 out to the 6 and the 8. I'm going to do that by remembering that this is a multiplication sign, and then I'm going to work with each of the problems. 4 times 6, and then 4 times 8. I'm going to be adding those two problems together. 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times 8 is 32. I'm going to add those two numbers together. 32 plus 24. 6 and 5. Sometimes when you're looking at the distributive property, you might come to a problem that's already been distributed out, and it might look like 3 times 2 plus 3 times 8. When I'm looking at this problem, I notice that 3 is a duplicated factor, which means I see it more than once. So I'm going to pull that out and put it by itself. Then I'm going to look at the 2 plus the 8. That's the problem I'm going to put in my parentheses. Now I can choose if I want to put a little multiplication sign here, or if there's nothing there, I know I need to multiply. What I've done in this problem is I've started with a distributed problem, and I've brought it back down into 3 times 2 plus 8. Let's give that one more try. If I have the problem 6 times 2 plus 6 times 5, I'm going to first look for the repeated factor. The factor that I see more than once is 6. So I'm going to pull that out and put 6 times parentheses. Now I want to add my addition problem into my parentheses. So I'm going to find my 2 plus and my 5. Those are the only things left I have in the problem, and I'm going to put those inside my parentheses. If I wanted to distribute that 6 back out, I would grab it and I would go 6 times 2, and then I'd distribute it to the 5, 6 times 5. What I've done is I've recreated my first equation. This is something that you can do using multiplication because it's a rule of multiplication, it's a property. We're going to use this distributive property while we're working on bigger multiplication problems using the rectangle method. When I'm looking at the problem 32 times 6, and I'd ask you to solve that using the rectangle method, you would draw a rectangle and you would expand out the number 32, making it 30 plus 2. Then you take your factor, 6, and put it on the side. Using this method, what I'm doing is I'm distributing 6 to the 30 and then distributing it out to the 2. Does that remind you a bit of our distributive property? If I were to do this written down, it would look like 6 times 30 plus 6 times 2. I can look for my repeated factor, which is 6, and pull that out. And I can put 30 plus 2 in my parentheses. Essentially what we've been doing with the rectangle method is we've been distributing the 6 and putting it in the box. 6 times 30, 6 times 2, and solving them with a plus. We've been doing the distributive property without calling it that for the last few days. Then we've been solving it, 180 and 12. Let's try using the rectangle method and the distributive property one more time. Let's use the example 3 times 42. To use the rectangle method, I'm going to draw a rectangle and distribute the number 42 into 40 plus 2. Then I'm going to pull my factor 3 to the side. Now I'm going to distribute the 3 to the 40 and then to the 2. 3 times 40, 3 times 2. And we're going to add those together. 3 times 40 plus 3 times 2 is your equation. Then I'm going to squish that problem into a smaller equation, finding my repeated factor. 3 is my repeated factor. Then I'm going to put the remaining equation, 40 plus 2, in my parentheses. What I've done is I've combined my rectangle method with my distributive property.